What's up, everybody? Today we're going to talk about news sources. I had a great question come into me from a viewer. What kinds of news do I trust, and what do I use to sift reality as things are happening all over the world, all around us, all the time? An important question, and one I was actually very glad to receive because it was the very thing that I was just thinking about. The world is changing dynamically, moment to moment, day to day. We have a new war that just has broken out recently, of course. And whenever war breaks out, it is one of the most crucial times to really think through the critical issues of the day, because there's going to be a lot of lies and propaganda that surrounds these kinds of breaking events, especially when there's violent conflict taking place. And so for the Christian, it's all the more important for him or her to think very carefully about what kinds of news media one is going to consume as he or she is trying to interpret all the things that are happening around us in such a crazy time that we live in. You and I, we both feel it. The tectonic plates of our entire ecosystem of civilization is shifting beneath our feet. And so we have to have very sensitive antenna up to perceive the difference between truth and lies. Now, what I'm going to do in this video here today is I'm going to share with you a number of news media sources that I listen to. And I want to be careful right off the bat to let you know that I think probably the best principle of all is the principle that René Descartes gave in his Meditations on First Philosophy, where he talks about de omnibus dubitandum, that is, doubt everything. And so that's what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give you several rules for how I think Christians should consume media, especially news media. And then I'm actually going to share with you some of the sources that I listen to. Some of them I trust, others a little bit more skeptically so. So the first principle of news consumption, de omnibus dubitandum, doubt everything. Everything you perceive, whether it's print media, whether it's a show, whether it's a podcast, you should have your mental grid, your mental filtration system on and functioning, no matter who you're listening to. Doubt everything. I'm not saying we refuse to believe anything. I'm not saying that we should be entirely skeptical about the world around us, but that we should always be perceiving with a mindset of discernment, no matter who we're listening to, no matter how much we trust them in the past, no matter how much we align with their worldview. De omnibus dubitandum, that's the first rule for media consumption. Second is a principle that Francis Schaeffer gave. Now, Francis Schaeffer, one of my theological heroes, Presbyterian minister, philosopher, cultural engagement expert, let's say. He was doing one of his videos. I would really love to watch them all again. I think it was the How Should We Then Live series, when he's talking about news media. And he specifically gives an example of how words and pictures do align with one another. And he gives this example in the video. It's a video teaching series that he has. It's kind of old and a little bit goofy now, but it still makes a very good point. He shows an image of a riot taking place in a particular city, and he runs it kind of twice. And the first time, the newscaster is describing it as being an absolutely chaotic scene downtown, rioters everywhere, chaos ensues, etc. And then he runs the same video clip, a second time, and he's talking about the newscaster, whose words are broadcasting over top the pictures, is talking about the right of civic protest and the freedom of expression, First Amendment rights to express one's thoughts, etc. And how prescient, I should say, did that example become for us, especially when we think about some of the riots that took place in the year 2020, for instance. So when words and pictures overlap, you have to be very, very careful, because the mind is prone to interpret the pictures based on the words that it's hearing or reading. So that's just a principle that Francis Schaeffer gives. Third principle, I would say, of consuming news media is make sure to have a varied diet of sources. A varied diet of sources, just like your real diet that you eat in terms of your meats and your vegetables and your fruits and your grains has to be varied, and it would probably be a bad thing for you to consume one particular item all the time. So also that is true with your consumption of news media. Let me give you an example. I know several persons who work during the day and they listen to news opinion pieces, let's say, a news opinion throughout the day. And suppose you do that every single day for much of your life, much of your working life, the same opinion. whether it's Rush Limbaugh, he's deceased, or whoever else you're listening to. If it's the same source all the time, then what happens is you end up thinking just like that particular person. But again, go back to my first principle, de omnibus dubitandum, doubt everything. You have to have a skeptical eye and a skeptical ear for what that person is telling you, even if your worldview largely agrees with that person. So the best way to avoid that kind of just like narrow streaming of your mental apparatus is to vary the sources as much as possible. Okay, so not only to vary the sources, but vary the kind of media that you consume. So if you're on Twitter a lot, you should also listen to some long form podcasts. If you listen to a lot of long form podcasts, you might want to take in some shorter news overview type shows as well, just so that you're getting a broad panoply of information, but you're also able to focus down and get some real substantial conversations listened to as well. So you want to vary not only the sources that you're listening to, the journalists, the networks, the YouTube channels, whatever it is, but you also want to vary the kinds of content you should be doing. Some reading, some watching of live social media, some listening to journalistic, what we call straight news, though that's very rare these days, and then some maybe more concerted opinion pieces. Again, you want to vary as much of the diet as possible so that you get the best sense of what's actually happening. The next thing I'd say, and this would be my fourth principle, is you pretty much have to avoid mainstream media at this point. Mainstream equals brain bleed. I knew I was going to say that wrong. Mainstream media, brain bleed. Now, why is that? Well, because it's not like they're intrinsically bad people, though I think there's some malevolent actors for sure in the mainstream media, but rather it has to do with the volume of economic resources that are pumped into that kind of mainstream media, so much so that the media source ends up merely supporting the worldview of its financial backers. Now, just by way of example, if you were to listen to, let's say, 2 hours of cable news tonight, watch the commercials. Watch who's supporting the network that you are watching. If it's a ton of pharmaceutical companies, and probably it is, then you can bet that you're going to have some stilted reporting when it comes to medical news and information. Not to get too specific about some of those things, but you get the idea. You have to watch out for that. Mainstream equals brain bleed. I listen to very little mainstream media anymore. I just don't trust them. I don't trust the old newspapers, and it's sad because I used to love waking up and getting the Akron Beacon Journal when I was a kid. I'd read the front page a little bit. I'd read the sports section. I'd read the funnies, the opinion pieces. It was great to get the newspaper. Listen, I can't even get a newspaper delivered to my porch anymore that I would probably trust. Maybe the Epic Times or something like that, but I don't have a subscription for that. Be very, very careful to take in mainstream media. For the most part, it's entirely corrupt at this point. I really don't trust it. That's my opinion, but go with me if you will. Next, and this is fifth, I would say that you should have some sort of a preference for independence and or citizen-based journalism, okay? Independent sources and citizen-based journalism. That's one of the reasons why I'm going to talk a little bit about Twitter, or X as it's called today, because you get away from the MSNBCs, the CNNs, the NBCs of the world, and you follow interesting people who are giving you real-time, on-the-ground information. And I'm going to give you several examples of people that I think you probably could follow. Each of them may be an expert in one or two particular areas of cultural transaction, but may nevertheless be better than just listening to some cable news digest in the evening, whether it's to the right or to the left in terms of its political perspective. And then next, and this is the last one, and then we're going to go to some actual examples of what I listen to. Listen to anybody that is willing to correct false information that they've previously given, false or inaccurate information. If anybody is willing to make public corrections, that person is more to be trusted than somebody who never corrects anything. Now, unfortunately, most media is drive-by media. They drive by, they blast away, usually very politically oriented, and they never repent or apologize or correct anything, no matter who it damages, no matter who it harms, no matter how false the information ends up turning out to be. most journalistic sources almost refuse to correct themselves unless almost there's like a social media campaign to force them to do it. Anybody who will admit their error is going to be better than anybody who does not admit their error. Now, with that, let me go ahead and do a little bit of screen share here, and we're going to talk about some specific sources. Now, the first way that I garner a lot of my media is through Twitter. Now, Twitter is a form of social media. It's very different from Facebook. I do different things with Twitter than I do with Facebook. Facebook is for showing pictures of your kid's birthday party. It's for the nice little memories it has of last year's graduation party. It's for congratulating people on their engagements and marriages and things like that. But Twitter is, in my view, one of the best sources to actually get news. And the more people that you follow, the more interesting types of people that you follow, the more kinds of aggregated news sources you're actually going to get. Now, let me show you a few of the people that I tend to follow. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples on the screen here. I listen to, and again, de omnibus dubitandum, doubt everything, okay? Assume that everybody has some kind of perspective. That are though some people more interesting or more worthy of your consideration than others. Miranda Devine, for instance, from the New York Post, has done a very good job covering some political scandals, including the Hunter Biden laptop story. Emily Jashinsky, I see her on several different shows. I find her to be fairly objective in some of her reporting, though again, I don't agree with her on everything. I'm going to say that 1,000 times probably. Don't agree with them on everything. Just de omnibus dubitandum, right? Ali Bradley is doing some very interesting reporting with relation to the border controversy. So she's a pretty good follow as it comes to what's actually happening on the border. Michael Schellenberger did very good reporting when it came to the Twitter files recently, and I find him to be somebody who's interesting enough and objective enough. Now, he's a liberal, he's a lefty, a lot of these people are, but a lot of them, again, if they're willing to admit error, that's a sign to me that that at least the person is trying to be somewhat intellectually honest. David Bahnsen is a person that I would really trust when it comes to economics, especially as they're unfolding. Bahnsen is the son of the Reformed pastor and philosopher and apologist Greg Bahnsen. So I find him to be a very interesting person to follow. He also has news clips that show up on his own YouTube channel, as well as I think he's on Fox from time to time. I definitely see him on the YouTube channels as well. Victor David Hansen, regular guest on a number of different shows, including Fox programming. Glenn Greenwald, a very interesting follow. Listen, I know you're going to say about his lifestyle and his personal biography. I get it that I'm not interested in that either, but he's been willing to break major stories that have been kind of glossed over by the mainstream media. And for that reason alone, especially having to do with the advancement of the police state regarding technology and surveillance and things like that, he's been pretty good in that area. Lara Logan, I wish she was still on a regular show. I guess she has a channel on Rumble or something like that, which I don't personally have, but I find her very interesting. She's a person whose lived experience definitely testifies to the fact that she's a gritty reporter. Maybe a little bit on the conspiratorial side these days, but I guess then again, who isn't? The world is so crazy right now, and there's so much lie and distortion. She herself was brutalized during her time of reporting in the Middle East. I think that's fairly well known. For that reason alone, I find her to be a rather compelling voice. A few more here in terms of Twitter. Andy No, probably that's NGO. He probably does the best reporting as it relates to Antifa in this nation. The Epic Times I find to have some pretty good stories. Lila Rose doing amazing things as it regards abortion in this nation. Dr. Deborah So, who not a Christian. A lot of these people aren't Christians. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Deborah So, not a Christian as far as I'm concerned. She's an expert on sex and gender, but I think she largely gets it right when it comes to the science of how these things interrelate. Emily Whitten, not a very well-known person, but she has some very good stuff on classic books and literature, which I like to listen to her from time to time. She's on The World and Everything in It, which I'm going to recommend here in just a moment, so hang with me. Trey Yingst probably doing some of the best stuff right now as it relates to the Israel and Hamas war that's unfolding. Abigail Schreier, another person I think who's kind of an honest broker when it comes to sex and gender these days. And then, interestingly enough, you know of the Babylon Bee, which is a comedic satire site. Well, their source or their other page called Not the Bee gives you some of the stories that the mainstream media is pleased to gloss over. A lot of times they're things that the media would be glad to hide from you. So not to be, it comes across as fairly sarcastic, but might actually be fairly helpful. Now, let me take you to some podcasts and other news sources that I listen to regularly. And again, de omnibus dubitandum, right? Doubt everything. But this first one right here, very trustworthy as far as I'm concerned, very trustworthy. It's a show called The World and Everything in It, which is done by World Magazine. A great half an hour listen. This would be what I would suggest that Christians listen to on their way to work. So if you have a phone, you probably do. You can listen to a podcast. Just get any podcasting app, Google Podcast or Spotify or iTunes or whatever it is. I'm sure there are so many other podcasters out there, but The World and Everything in It's a nice, about 30 minutes. It's what I would consider straight news from a Christian perspective. Okay, there's not a lot of political slant. There's not a lot of hardcore commentary or divisively opinion-oriented pieces. It's a nice news show. The first 10 to 15 minutes will come out and just kind of tell you what's happening in the world. A lot of times they'll tell you things that the mainstream media ignores, such as Christian persecution in places around the world. Mary Reichert is one of the hosts of that show. She's an interesting follow on Twitter, by the way. A little bit more snarky on Twitter than she is on the show, but I appreciate that about her. I actually agree with a lot of what she says for the most part. So this is a great little show to listen to on your way in, and then it usually will do some kind of an interview, very different stuff than the mainstream media is covering, because the mainstream media, right, they've got their main things that they just want to smush in your face all the time. A lot of it's boring, a lot of it's repetitious, a lot of it's kind of stupid. But this show does some very interesting interviews with people all around the world about issues that relate to Christians. And then often there's an opinion piece at the end. They tell you it's an opinion piece. I appreciate that. Cal Thomas is a guy who will come on and he'll give a little opinion piece. And sometimes you get a little opinion too, but they often interview some of the best, most interesting people, including a lot of Christian college professors and other experts on things as they're unfolding in real life. Okay. Another one that I listen to quite a bit would be Albert Mohler's The Briefing. Again, I would rate this as a very highly reliable news source, just as I would rate the previous. Again, The World and Everything in It, I very largely trust them and what they're saying, probably 95, 97% trustworthiness. Same thing with Albert Mohler, except that he's a Baptist. Other than that, I trust him for the most part. Don't agree with everything he says, de omnibus dubitandum, again, but I find that his insight is very, very helpful. Typically what he does is 2 or 3 stories every day, but he does it almost every single day, Monday through Friday, takes a break in the summertime, always from a Christian perspective. What I really like about Albert Mohler is he tends to do things on, for instance, abortion, or sexuality and gender issues of the day. He does a lot on the Supreme Court. He's very knowledgeable about world history as well as church history. And so a lot of the times as he's discussing a particular story that's breaking live, he'll also give you the historical background. And honestly, I don't know how he does it, because he puts out amazing content 5 times a week and all expertly put together with very good grounding in a biblical worldview. He's always talking about Christian worldview analysis. So I would rate Albert Mohler's show as pretty highly reputable as far as a news source goes. Now let's go to something a little bit off the beaten path here. This is a show on YouTube called Breaking Points. And the hosts here are Sagar and Jetty, who is pictured on the left, and then Crystal Ball on the right. I don't know if that's her real name. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just one of those funny names. Maybe it's like her show name or something. I don't know. Crystal Ball seems a little unlikely, but maybe that's actually how she's called. So this is not a Christian show, and it would be an alternate to watching cable news, because I find it on YouTube. It's probably on other sources as well, like Spotify, I would imagine. This show comes out every single day for the most part, at least Monday through Friday, and it's usually broken up into 5 or 7 segments, which you can watch each segment individually as YouTube videos. What I like about this is that it's it's not a Christian show. And you say, well, everything should be Christian. Okay, I know what you mean. But I do like to hear other perspectives from time to time. Remember my principle about gathering as many different types of information as you can that I gave you earlier, like a balanced diet. You have to hear sometimes what unbelieving sources are saying too. Now, what I do like about Crystal and Sagar is that they do not appear to be beholden to the two major political parties. And this is why I despise a lot of cable mainstream news, is because it's pretty obviously either on the right or the left. Whereas this duo here that breaks the news, they do give opinions, but they will very often critique, and sometimes harshly, both the left and the right, both the Democrats and the Republicans, and the independents too. So I find their insights and analysis very helpful from time to time. Again, do I agree with everything? Nope. I'm going to take in the meat and spit out the bones, right? I'm going to eat the watermelon and spit out the seeds. But I do find their insight to be pretty important from time to time. Now, let's get into a little bit more controversial realm here. Here's Ben Shapiro. I do listen to his show sometimes. I always want to call him Ben Stiller for some reason. I know that's two totally different guys. Ben Shapiro show. Man, he's on fire right now, obviously, because of the Israel-Hamas situation. And all the more prone, I think, to perhaps some slanted takes here. Now, he's very conservative for the most part, does a very good job on issues related to abortion, gender, and sexuality, which are hot button issues of the day. But you can kind of take him or leave him, I suppose. I found him to be extremely intelligent, which I admire, even if I disagree with some of his conclusions. I do admire intelligent people. Articulate people that are also intelligent are very powerful. And Ben Shapiro happens to have that combination of intelligence and erudition, which makes him a formidable force in reading the news. But again, remember, this is not straight news. This is always going to be news with a particular point of view. And as much as it's helpful, consume it. If not, dispense. Let me go on to another one here, the Megyn Kelly show. Now, I really don't like mainstream news, and I prefer independent journalism. So Megyn Kelly fits that description. She left the mainstream news world, though she was one time the starlet. I mean, she had captured the attention of all of the mainstream news. She had done presidential debates and such. She became part of the news cycle a few times as well, especially with her interactions with Trump, little rivalry there. But when she left the mainstream news, she started her own show. And one of the things I love about the Megyn Kelly show, besides the fact that I largely agree with her, though she's a Roman Catholic and often says things that just make me go, what is she thinking? What's she talking about? I find some of the things that she says about religion baffling, just because she appears to be a very nominal Roman Catholic to me. Nevertheless, she has really good interviews, and this is why you should follow independent journalism instead of mainstream news, because a lot of what mainstream news does is it'll give you a 7-minute, if that, maybe a 4-minute encapsulation of some raging controversy or event, and then they'll cut to commercial. Well, the benefit of listening to long-form podcasts is that you can go really, really, really deep into any particular issue. Let's say the border happening today, right? That's a complex issue. Well, you can give me a 2-minute piece and show me a few clips of people crossing the river. Fox News will do that every morning, right? But if I want to hear somebody go in depth about, from a like a 2-hour perspective, well, that's what independent journalism can do. They can give you long form conversation that can take you way deeper into most issues than Fox or CNN is ever going to do. Okay, so usually you listen to something like this on podcast, but of course she will also cut it up and post it on YouTube as well, so you can just skip to the clips that you're interested in watching. So Megyn Kelly, I do very much appreciate the interviews that she has on her show. Jordan Peterson, not a Christian, but another intellectual who combines high intellect with erudition, the ability to articulate very, very well, perhaps better than anybody else on planet Earth. I largely agree with his politics. I wish he would come to faith. I think he's close to coming to faith in Christ. I've done several videos on Jordan Peterson on this channel before, but I find him to be very, very helpful. And again, what amazes me about Peterson, and I do think you should listen to his show regularly, is that he can talk intelligently on almost any topic, whether it's historical or contemporary. Very few people can do that. Okay, a lot of people have an expertise in one particular area, or some people are generalists and they can talk a little bit about a lot, but Peterson can talk a lot about a lot. He's just a very well-read man, very familiar with world history, philosophy, psychology. That makes him all the more interesting. The fact that he's a bit of a controversialist, I also appreciate that as well, because he's willing to take a stand on a lot of the moral issues of the day. And again, the long form podcast where you can listen to 2 hours of him talking with a particular guest about any given topic. I find that to be very, very helpful because it takes me so much deeper than I can go if I'm just watching a 4-minute CNN clip and then get hit with a Pfizer advertisement or something like that. So Jordan Peterson podcast, very helpful. Now here's another controversialist, the Joe Rogan show. I kind of got a little bit frustrated when he went over to Spotify completely because I was consuming his content more on Google Podcast and YouTube. You can still get some of his clips on YouTube, but he's mostly on Spotify because he has a contracted deal. Now here, if we started with something like a 95 to 97% trust ratio with the world and everything in it, Joe Rogan's probably down at about like 37% trust for me because he's not a Christian and he's pretty secular in the way that he views the world, including like sex and marriage and gender and things like that and drug use and all that kind of stuff. But what Rogan will do is he will sit down and he'll have a 2 to 3 hour conversation with all kinds of different people. I mean, conservatives and leftists and weirdos and MMA fighters and intellectuals and university professors and medical experts. I mean, he talks to so many different kinds of people, and I love it, and so does so many other people. They love the fact that he can have brutally real, honest conversations. And you know what? Joe Rogan, though he's not a Christian, he does something that Christians should do, which is to sit down and actually listen to people. That's what I love about him, his podcast. He really, really listens to the guests that he's talking to, and he gives critical feedback. Sure, he'll take a stand from time to time. He'll disagree with certain of his guests, but he lets them talk. He lets them get their viewpoint out there. So a guy like RFK, who's going to be shut out by the mainstream media, of course, because he doesn't fit either of the two main brands, Republican or Democrat, Rogan will sit down and talk to him for 3 hours and just let the guy give his opinion. I love that. I think that's fantastic. I think that's probably a pretty good example, and I wish more people would do things like that. So the Joe Rogan show, I totally disagree with him on a lot of things, but I really appreciate that long form style with honest listening and interaction. I think that's great. Okay, 2 more here. The Timcast show on YouTube. I don't know how he uploads as much content as he does. He's just constantly uploading content. Sometimes he'll, his leads will be a little bit like, okay, really? I mean, how many times is he going to talk about World War III? Well, maybe we're in World War III already. Who knows? But Tim does a very good job of giving almost like constant updates on what's happening in the world, whether it's political, whether it's cultural news, whether it's riots happening. He's just on it. He really seems to have his finger on the pulse of the story of the day. Okay. And again, independent thinker, not bought, not paid for, not purchased by the major sponsors. He does his own thing, independent journalism. I like it. I like the edge that he has. Again, de omnibus dubitandum, but I appreciate somebody who comes at it from a non-mainstream perspective. Now, the last one, you're probably going to roll your eyes a little bit, and it's okay because it's going to countervail everything I just said. But I do watch Fox and Friends in the morning sometimes, and it's only because I have to watch something at 5:30 or 6 in the morning when I'm doing my workout. If I don't go outside for a run, I want to turn on the TV and just see what's happening. Fox and Friends, I got frustrated with Fox a while back, but this is the one show, and the main reason, it's not that I really even like any of the personalities necessarily on the show, but it's just nice to wake up and listen to something that's kind of real time, catching me up on anything that happened while I was asleep. Okay, so those are the sources that I listen to. Some of them I trust to varying degrees. And I would love to know what I missed. So if you've made it all the way this far in this video, please comment and let me know if I got it right. Thank you so much for checking in. Love you lots. Talk to you later.